1,000 staff in the US. We have a global presence, so that gives us a unique insight into the technologies that are coming out from different parts of the world. So, yeah, next
There we
slide.
go.
Next slide,
Okay.
Martin.
Oh,
Yes,
there
I
we
was
are.
just, it gives you an idea of which countries we operate in. Next slide. So primarily, a lot of our work has focused around transit. We've had the opportunity to work with many agencies over the years in the space of transit vehicle specification, support, maintenance, garage design. So the fleet and facilities practice, which is led by Frank Banco, based out of Houston, is a good place for a lot of this work comes out of. Next slide. So our practice though covers the entire spectrum. We look at it from an asset management standpoint. So from the procurement stage where they're looking at vehicle procurement specifications, quality assurance in terms of in-plant services and inspections for vehicles, developing the KPIs for productivity and reliability. We've worked with agencies as well as DOTs on maintenance programs and training, followed by the SOPs. Vehicle in-service audits, we have licensed mechanics that have gone in and done condition assessments for various organizations, looked at rebuild scope, in-house versus outsourcing, fleet disposal plans, economic optimal replacement age. We've done a lot of asset management plans for DOTs as well as transit agencies, focusing on when is the optimal point where they should be retiring their fleet, and then long-term fleet purchasing and costing plans for budgeting purposes. Next slide. Yeah, so I think Jacob did a good job speaking about my background, so I think we go on to the next slide. Yeah, next. So in terms of the current climate, a lot of countries around the world, as well as cities, have made declarations to reduce their emissions. The Paris Accord, I've been doing a few of these webinars this week. I was on a webinar here in Toronto for our Canadian clients, then one for Australia, this one in New York, and then I have one later tonight with our colleagues in Germany. So it's a popular topic to talk about alternative fuels. So when it comes to New York, this is some of the research I did. Please correct me if it's wrong. The GHG emissions by 40%, 1990 emission levels by 2030, and transportation accounts for approximately 27% of USA's total GHG emissions, and approximately 36% of New York State's total GHG emissions are coming from transportation. So it's an opportunity that I think would be great to tackle with various alternative fuel technology. Next slide. So alternative fuels feasibility study objective. So what we look at is that the overall is improving the air quality, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce carbon footprint for New York State through greener fleet, reduce the cost of operating current conventional fuel systems. So it's interesting that certain alternative fuels actually end up costing you less to operate once you can get over the capex cost component. So it's a good thing to look at it from a total cost of ownership. Support environmental leadership within the community. Many times. The governments can lead by example, and by converting your own fleets to alternative fuels, be it CNG, hydrogen, or electric, you can create the charging infrastructure or the fueling infrastructure needed for smaller private sector fleets to also explore that. Looking at the best solutions for options for New York State's operating context, so we have found that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It requires a thorough analysis of the duty cycle of the respective vehicle and operation and stakeholder before coming up with the best solution. So we always recommend going through that vigorous process. Identification of risks associated with each fuel option, development of mitigation strategies is important. When it comes to the transit world, we've never thought about the autonomy of a diesel bus because we know it exceeds its daily duty cycle, right? You could run a block, which is a daily duty cycle for a bus for 18, 21 hours. I've seen extreme cases like that. And your constraint is actually just swapping out your driver at the limit of how many hours they can operate behind the wheel. So that those are examples where one has to rethink these strategies. Next slide. So what some of the fuel feasibility study goals that we look at is we are technology neutral. We don't have stocks in natural gas or hydrogen. So we just evaluating the technology based on its performance to the respective organization that it's being tested in. And the top flavor right now is electric battery. CNG with an RNG blend is also still, we see a lot of clients asking about that. Hydrogen as well. And then conducting a triple bottom line analysis of the alternative options and scenarios, from it, be it from an economic lens, a social lens, or an environmental lens. One of the things we also do is we look at all the capital and operating costs, but we also look at the soft cost about training and modifications to building. So one of the big things when one explores going electric is that the training behind the mechanics in the transit world and a lot of the public workspace that I've dealt with are 2 years away from retirement, and they don't want to learn new technology, so there's a challenge there. And it's also a good recruitment tool to bring young mechanics in, showing them that they're going to be working on new cutting edge technology. But even their tool sets, like the sockets, need to be static free depending on what type of electric vehicle they're working on and what type of components. So it creates new cost factors that need to be thought about. Implementation and pilot strategy recommendations are very important. We've spent a lot of time creating sort of a pilot cheat sheet, you can call it. So, what kind of KPI should we be tracking? Who should be working on the bus? So we have this whole process to help an organization go through a successful pilot of a technology. And then one of the things is you want to have a short-term and long-term strategy. So some of the technologies are still getting better and improving, and I call with some of them, like hydrogen and electric, I call it the HD DVD versus Blu-ray war going on still. So it's still a challenge there, and it might be one technology fits better in this application, whereas another fits better in another. So scaling that over time and understanding what you're going to do for some immediate wins versus long term is really important. Next slide. So in this one, I'll just briefly talk about the technology marketplace. So this slide here, I really like showing to new apprentices and mechanics as they're coming up. It shows you the technology marketplace, has diversified from where it was many years ago. You're seeing a lot of new technologies and interest. So the mechanic of today could potentially be repairing a fleet that covers close to 8 new fuel technologies, and you can see a lot of green there. So there's a lot of options: CNG and RNG, hydrogen, electric, plug-in hybrid, and clean diesel. So you've got a lot of diversity, but each of these technologies have their pros and cons. And what we tell our clients is it's going through that, having your class 1 to class 8 go through the application, look at your daily range, look at your requirements, and see which works. We worked with the city of Calgary here in Canada to look at their 400 garbage trucks to see if they could go electric or CNG. So we actually spent a lot of time, and they're now piloting some class 6 garbage trucks that are electric, and they're using for the class 8 side, they're using the CNG. So we constantly have to go through the process and see it's not a one size fits all. Next slide. Going back, the user groups are so important in this conversation. I remember having conversations with various DOTs here in Canada, and having an understanding of the vast network of user groups that are there, and the challenges they face. Like a lot of them are driven by hours and not kilometers. So by just looking at the fact that, they're using their vehicles 20 to 30 kilometers a day, it doesn't look bad, but they're actually running 10 to 15 hours a day because they're on site, they're being used to power tools or work off the jib cranes and stuff like that. So these are really important things that people need to consider. And that's why we do a lot of robust stakeholder engagement and weigh out the pros and cons. Considering the impact of facility modification and fueling infrastructure cost is really important. So, there's a spectrum there. If you're in the CNG space or have made commitments to CNG to an RNG blend to hydrogen is a very natural progression. If you're in the diesel gasoline space and you're looking, you could go straight to electric and explore that. It's just one of those considerations that you have to look at in terms of labor force and your supply chain as well. Next slide. So this is our sort of, we call it the roadmap. How do you go to a different technology? First, develop a GHG inventory. That's the step one we tell our clients, understand what you operate today and what the footprint of that operation is. Then, with your political leaders as well as your council or other levels of government, establish reduction targets that are reasonable or a little bit, I would say, hard but achievable. Understand then your user groups and your vehicle's daily operations. That once you have that understanding that, look, I need 150 kilometers a day, I need the ability to move 3,000 pounds of cargo, then conduct the market research for alternative propulsions that meets that operating need, and then understand the technology impact on that user group. So go back to that user group and say, look, we've shortlisted 2 or 3 technologies and we think this is going to work, but here's all the impacts, in terms of how you operate this, the facility modifications. And then once that's done, you have buy-in, explore grants and incentives to complete your triple bottom line business case. So see if there's opportunities to leverage state or federal funds to reduce the cost of that purchase. Get buy-in from senior staff, council, and other departments to proceed, and then develop a pilot program with established performance parameters for vehicles and purchase lease units. I can't stress if you're going to buy the couple of the units, establish your pilot program up front and what the KPIs are, because I have seen a lot of pilot programs being questioned by senior government officials because they changed their KPIs halfway through because they were not accurately capturing the information. So invest upfront in that conversation, and then develop the change management plan addressing all the impacted stakeholders and facilities. This is a change management plan. Once you go down a path of an alternative fuel, it's not that easy. In transit, we tell people that buying the bus is the easiest part, buying an electric bus. You've got to think about the chargers, the utility rates, the interface, and the maintenance of that vehicle. So it's really important to consider that sort of systems approach and how your organization is going to handle this new technology. Next slide. So just to summarize those stages, stage one, I call it understanding. Understand your operation and your GHG targets. Stage two is explore. Go out there and understand what's available and what could work for you. Stage three is implementation, change management, maintenance, facility modifications, buy-in from stakeholders and senior management. And then stage four is execution and monitoring, pilot vehicle program, review of pilot data, and user feedback. Next slide, Martin. So this slide here is transitioning to a green public works fleet. So this on the left shows you the fleet when we started, and on the right shows you what we ended up doing with the fleet in a 10-year window. So this is a 10-year plan for them. They haven't gone through all this transition, but as their vehicles are being replaced, this is what they're going to. So you can see gasoline has substantially vanished. So there's a lot of other technologies that they're exploring. Next slide. Yeah, so in terms of funding opportunities, I did some quick research, and I did see the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, their funding of approximately 44 million for national grants, state grants, and school bus rebates. I did see that there was the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program for discounts for green, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. And then the NYSERDA provides rebates per charging port for level 2 charging stations. So this was some of the research that we found. I'm pretty sure there's other programs and items that you guys can access for this. Next slide, Martin. Thank you for your time today. I don't know if we have time for questions, but Martin is based out of Albany and would be happy to have that conversation with you guys.
Absolutely. So let's see, Jacob, should I stop the share at this point?
Yeah, you can. Does anybody have any questions for Naeem? I'm not hearing any questions. I don't see any in the chat box, but I think that's a great presentation, Naeem, and I liked, especially like the graphic there of the transition from the existing fleet to the 10 years down the road. I think that's a really good representation of kind of what some of these municipal fleets could end up doing. I know you mentioned that you guys are really fuel neutral, which kind of rings a bell with us at Clean Cities, because that's one of the kind of the main taglines that we go by. We definitely are on the same page where it's not a fuel type that we're promoting. It's just a transition to a better alternative fuel. And I know you mentioned that in that Calgary situation that right, they were looking to transition the refuse fleet to either battery or electric or CNG, and it kind of ended up where that Class 6 truck they're testing as a battery electric, and then the Class 8 is CNG. I mean, that's kind of what I've been hearing is really that at this point, the true Class 8 heavy-duty vehicles is CNG, and potentially in the future, hydrogen is kind of more aligned with that, and we're still kind of that medium duty for battery electric. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I would say on the heavy duty application, because of the physical weight of the batteries, you're losing a lot of capacity, cargo capacity, and that's why the Class 8 garbage truck is still being developed. I know, talking to New York City, that on Earth Day they were gonna open the Mac. They have an electric Mac. I don't know. I don't know if that actually went forward,
Okay.
but that was a big planned reveal that day, and it's something that I think we will see, but I think it's going to take some time. I would say if you're looking for the next 5 years for a heavy duty, you might be looking at CNG or hydrogen, but I think after that point you will see more innovation occurring in that space. You do have the Tesla semi-trailer that's electric, and there are other players moving in that space as well.
Very good. Thank you. So if nobody else has any questions, we will move on to the next agenda item. But again, I want to thank Martin and Naeem for that presentation. Very informative.
Excellent. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Not a problem. So let me see here. Next on the agenda, we wanted to move into kind of outlining what Capital District Clean Communities is working on this year in 2020. So just kind of going to breeze through some of the tasks that we have from Department of Energy. So each year we work on a Department of Energy contract, and we're kind of given a variety of tasks that are meant to help kind of promote and document the alternative fuel use in the Capital District. So the tasks that you see here on this slide, tasks 1 and 2, are kind of just like the general project management and kind of data collection tasks that we perform and then report back to the Department of Energy. So task one is really just us developing a project management plan for the upcoming year. We document the work that we expect to do in 2020, send that to the Department of Energy so they kind of have an idea of what we're working on, and we can use that as a baseline. It is a kind of a flexible document that we're allowed to make changes to and kind of swap things out, which is fortunate for this year because there has been quite a bit of changes, as you may be aware. So the two tasks are more or less kind of data collection. Task 2.1 is an annual progress report where we collect information from a lot of our stakeholders, and I think many of you on the call have probably gotten contacted from us to fill out some information in a spreadsheet. That final annual report essentially documents the greenhouse gas emission reductions for the Capital District, as well as all of the known alternative fuel fleet usage that we have at the time. Right now, the 2019 annual report is still in its draft stage and being reviewed by the Department of Energy. I expect that it'll be approved for final sometime soon, and at that point, I'll be sure to send that out via our email blast. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. Task 2.2, our alternative fuel price tracking, is something that we do every quarter. We reach out to alternative fuel stations, mostly by phone call, just to track the current prices of alt fuel use in the region. We then input that into kind of an online tool that Department of Energy has for us and send that to them on a quarterly basis. So they have that information and can compare it to other coalitions across the country. Our task 2.3 task, alternative fuel station verification. So we try to keep tabs on new stations and stations that have closed for all alternative fuels. And then if we try to keep an eye on that, and if there's anything that we're aware of, there's a spreadsheet that we can send to you or contact the stakeholder directly, and we can fill that out to get the information to give that back to the Department of Energy. And for that task, primarily, that information is used and put back into their alternative fuel station locator, which is a very comprehensive list of all the alt fuel stations in the country. And it's the tool that we use a lot when trying to track and document not only EV charging stations, but also propane, CNG, and all other alt fuel stations as well. Our task 2.4, peer-to-peer information sharing, is a pretty simple requirement that we do. Monthly, we participate in phone calls with other Clean Cities coalitions in the Northeast region. But it also includes us attending some in-person meetings with other Clean Cities coalitions and Department of Energy staff from around the country. So this year, we are expected to have an in-person meeting in Philadelphia back in April with the other Northeast region coalitions, as well as the Mid-Atlantic region coalitions. So that in-person meeting was actually canceled completely. We had a quick webinar on that day to kind of fill its place, but in reality, it was canceled. And then in August, we were expected to have an in-person national workshop in Washington, D.C. And so the in-person portion of that is obviously canceled this year, but we will have a 2 or 3 day kind of virtual workshop where we'll participate in some webinar sessions with other coalitions, as well as some kind of specific training.
Hey, Jacob.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I saw in the chat that Tara's trying to get back in. Can you let her in?
Let me see here. There we go. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
And task 2.5, vehicle station and cost tracking. Again, something that we just try to keep a pulse on. If there's any of our stakeholders that we know that have recently acquired any new alt fuel vehicles or installed any alt fuel stations, we like to keep an eye out and contact them and get an idea of what the cost of those vehicles and stations are and report that back to DOT. Again, so they kind of have a baseline of what these things are costing across the country. So if any of you all have any information on that, know of any recently purchased alt fuel vehicles, whether it's within your own organization or others in the region, please let me know and I can work with you to get the information that we need, or you can put me in contact with someone else that you might think may have some information for us. The other portion of the work that we do of our contract work are in these, what we call task 3 tasks. So these are kind of more of the flexible tasks that we have kind of jurisdiction over, what type of events that we want to do, and they're more interactive where we're actually out there working with the stakeholders. These are really kind of meant to focus on you know, the core alt fuel technologies, and really providing that outreach and education piece that we do here at Clean Cities. So I'm going to go over these a little more in depth and kind of go over what we've been trying to work on and what we have been working on, what we expect to work on throughout the rest of the year. So for our Subtask 3.1 projects, they're outlined as stakeholder listening sessions. These listening sessions are kind of intended to collect the thoughts on the alt fuel vehicle use from kind of a different perspective, and you know, whatever that listening session is tailored to. Then we report that back to the Department of Energy, and they can then pass that information along to vehicle manufacturers to help try to resolve some of the issues that may or may not have been identified in that listening session. So for this year, we originally planned on having 2 different listening sessions, both tailored toward electric vehicle drivers. One being with the Capital Car Share EV drivers. So the Capital District Car Share, they do have one BMW i3. So we've been working with Melanie from the Car Share to kind of track down the typical users of that vehicle. And we do have a listening session scheduled for July 9th right now to kind of get their feedback on how driving an electric vehicle in the car share space works for them, things they like, things they don't like, and kind of figure out how that might be different than a typical EV driver. Also currently planned on having, or originally planned on having, an Uber and Lyft EV driver listening session. But at this point, I haven't been able to really make any contact with any local Uber or Lyft EV drivers that are willing to participate. So I'm still working on trying to contact those participants, but also would be willing to hear if anybody on the call had any ideas, kind of any other alternative fuel groups that might be interesting to have a listening session for, that might have kind of some unique perspectives. So if there's anything you guys might have in mind, feel free to chime in at any point if it pops in your head, or if anybody has any thoughts right now. I'd be happy to hear those. For our Subtask 3.4, fuel technology outreach and education and events, we will be providing assistance and outreach and education activities for an upcoming NYSERDA project. We're calling it the Capital Region Mobility Hubs project, and that's being funded by NYSERDA and led by CDTA as well as a consultant team. Right now, the idea of the project is that we're going to identify various locations in the Capital District that are going to act as mobility hubs. So essentially a location where multiple modes of transportation are all going to kind of combine and work together, whether that's transit, bicycle, pedestrian, ride sharing, as well as potentially some electric bikes and electric scooters. We hope to identify some of these locations that are going to be at least near some existing EV charging, or potentially maybe identify some an opportunity to install EV charging at one or more of these locations, in the hopes that kind of we do see more of that electric vehicle use in the ride sharing space. Primarily, as I mentioned, we're going to be involved in developing and performing the outreach campaign to kind of first, work with the public to identify where these locations could be. And then once the project will have a component where it is actually going to install and operate at least one of these mobility hub locations. So we'll also work to provide outreach and kind of promote the use of these locations throughout the study. So right now that project is a little behind schedule, and it hasn't started yet. We had expected to be kind of working on that through the summer, but right now it looks like the project won't begin until around September of this year, and will probably last until late 2021. So 2 more tasks that we've been working on, site visits and educational tours. Typically, these are events that we hold in person. We facilitate a walkthrough of an existing alternative fuel facility. The stakeholders, are all invited. I think we've done some of these before at Plug Power. Last year, we did a walkthrough of kind of a tour of the state DOT charging bank and some of their plug-in hybrid vehicles. This year, we're looking to do a similar tour, but kind of have it, videotaped, a virtual walkthrough and recorded that can then be posted online, potentially live streamed as well. I'm currently working on setting up a tour of the new CDTA charging infrastructure and their battery electric bus fleet, but I don't have anything confirmed yet. So if anybody has any other thoughts or ideas on any alt fuel facilities in the region that would make a good kind of video walkthrough, please reach out and let me know. I'd be happy to hear from you. And our final subtask this year that we've been working on, subtask 3.7, our training and education. We're working on setting up a municipal EV readiness workshop. Again, this is an event that typically we would hold in person, but this year I'm planning on having kind of a virtual webinar type event. I haven't quite flushed it out yet. It may be kind of a 2-week, 1.5-hour kind of event. I have to see, kind of get some more feedback from my presenters on what we think is going to work best. Planning on having this presentation cover all the tools that municipalities are going to have that can promote electric vehicle adoption. Also some planning and permitting best practices and do's and don'ts from a electric vehicle installer to kind of give folks an idea of what they have to deal with and what makes it easier to implement these types of projects and what makes it more difficult and maybe more expensive. And also we're going to have some presenters from local municipalities that have recently installed a significant amount of electric vehicle charging or have recently implemented some EV readiness policy, whether that's in their their new development code or parking policy, something like that. So really want to get to hear from a multitude of different kind of perspectives on this, on how local municipalities in the region can increase their EV adoption. The last thing is not really a subtask that we've been working on, but a project that we've been working on with a number of the other New York State Clean Cities Coalition, is this Funding the Transition to an Electric School Bus webinar. This is actually later on today at 1 o'clock. As I mentioned, primarily coordinated with the Clean Cities Coalition of Central New York and Empire Clean Cities out of New York City. They did most of the legwork on getting the webinar together, and we've kind of helped reach out to folks that we know in the region that have an interest in electric school buses. The webinar is going to cover kind of the latest in financing options for electric vehicles or battery electric school buses, as well as we'll hear from a few of OEMs on what actually is available in terms of electric school buses. And also a portion of it will be a presentation from a company called Highland Electric Transportation, which is essentially a third party who will go out, get the grants and actually acquire the school buses and the needed infrastructure for the school districts and lease it back to them, in theory, at a reduced rate. So definitely something interesting that if you or any of your colleagues in the school district may have an interest in, please pass that along. I'm going to copy the registration link into the chat box after I get done sharing my screen. So take a look at that there. If you'd like to attend, you can just click on that registration link and register for this afternoon's webinar. That's all I have for our Clean Cities work this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone is interested to know more about any of the projects, or just have any kind of general questions on what exactly any of that work entails. I'm not hearing any questions, so at this point we have some brief updates from our partners at NYSERDA and NYPA on some of the ZEV initiatives in New York State. David McCabe, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Thank you, David. You didn't have any slides to present, did you?
I do not.
Okay. So it's all yours, Dave.
Okay. So my name is David McCabe. I am with NYSERDA's Clean Transportation team. I manage both the Drive Clean rebate program and the Charge Ready New York program. Both of these are active. The Charge Ready New York program was briefly on hold for about 6 weeks in the middle of the pandemic, but we relaunched it again on May 21st. So both of these are active. The Drive Clean rebate program is for electric vehicle rebates. To date, we have approved over 25,000 rebates, totaling $35.8 million. There is just over $19 million remaining in that program. Understandably, sales have been very slow since the middle of March. We have seen a slight increase in the past few weeks. I'm hoping that's a good trend going into the summer, but it remains to be seen. The Charge Ready New York program, like I said, we were briefly on hold, but that's open again. We have approved close to 2,000 charging ports and completed 1,164 of those. We have encumbered $7.8 million, so there's just over $4 million remaining in that program. I can break these ports down for you if you like. That we have completed 686 public location ports, 299 workplace locations, and 179 multi-unit dwelling ports. And same with this program. Since we've reopened, the applications have been slow. So we're not really sure what's, how soon things are going to pick back up after the pandemic. As far as the VW settlement, we are negotiating an agreement with DEC for additional funding for the Charge Ready New York program. I don't have an update for when that will be executed. I know that we are in negotiations for some funding for fast charge, DC fast chargers. We have also received some funding, VW money, for the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program, which is for medium and heavy duty vehicles, class 3 through 8. I don't manage that program, but that is open. That has remained open through the pandemic. Things are slow on that getting started. That's about all I have.
Thank you, Dave. That's I think that's exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, so essentially all of the programs are open right now and operating at back to normal. It's
Correct.
just a matter of kind of when you see that uptick in sales, right?
Correct. Yeah, we don't know how soon it's going to be before people will be willing to spend money again.
Very good. Understandable for sure. So thank you, David. Next, we have Rebecca Hughes from NYPA to give a brief overview on their Evolve New York program. Rebecca, you are on the line.
Yep, I'm here.
I think I need to stop my sharing and you can share.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind leading on the slides, do you have the slides that I forwarded?
Yep.
That would be great if you don't mind driving. So it seems like we have a pretty sophisticated clean transportation audience, so forgive me if this is a little bit basic. For you guys, it's not an insult to your level of expertise in any way.
What am I doing here?
And let's see, Jacob, I can pull it up if you
Nope, it's right here.
Awesome, thank you. So I manage marketing and customer experience for the Evolve New York program, which is part of the New York Power Authority. Let me just see if I can minimize here. You can go ahead to the next slide, Jacob. So basically, we are installing a huge number of direct current fast chargers across New York State over the next 5 years. And this is basically tackling that chicken and egg conundrum of range anxiety and some of the reasons that people who are interested in electric vehicles cite for not actually pulling the trigger and purchasing a fully battery electric car. So it's partially about consumer behavior and starting to sort of catalyze the market so that we can achieve that, bridging of that chasm around user adoption. And it's also partly about achieving the state's goals when it comes to electrification and decarbonization. So as you can see from the charts on the screen, right now we've got a very small number of fully battery electric vehicles on the road in New York State. Right now we've got about 47,000 zero emissions vehicles on the road. And if we're going to hit Governor Cuomo's climate leadership and protection and community protection act goals, we have to really achieve a pretty significant hockey stick curve of adoption. So you can see that by 2025, we'd have to have close to 1 million zero emission cars on the road. And by 2030, that clean climate leadership and community protection act goal would put us at 3 million vehicles on the road. That's out of New York's 10 million passenger vehicles that we have on the road currently. So we'd have to have about 30% electrification. Now, if you look at the other chart, you can see the level of public direct current fast charging that would be required to support vehicle electrification at that stage. So right now, on the low end, we'd need about 155 direct current fast chargers. On the high end, 404 in order to support, that level of user adoption. And those numbers, of course, go up commensurate with ownership and adoption. So looking ahead to 2030, on the low end of the estimate, we'll need about 5,700 direct current fast chargers across New York State. And on the high end of those estimates, we need close to 15,000. So now we'll just take a quick dive into where we are and where we're headed. Next slide, please. So on its surface, the source of this information is coming from PlugShare. So for anyone who's an EV driver, you know this app very well. So on the surface, it looks like we're doing really well when it comes to vehicle fast charging. You can look at all those dots on the map and say, wow, it would be really easy to drive an EV and to get all around New York State. But these are actually just level 2 chargers. So these are public slow chargers that can take multiple hours to charge your battery fully. So when you think about a road trip and a multi-hour stop, depending on the range of your vehicle, that might not be conducive to your current behavior. Next slide. So we start to drill down a little bit. And if we look at, taking out those slower level 2, alternating current chargers, and we just look at direct current fast charging of 50 kilowatts and greater, we see that we have about 550 fast chargers, so still not too bad. Next slide, please. But if we're thinking about consumer behavior and we want to just look at 150 kilowatts and greater, that will really align better with your typical kind of road trip experience of a 30-minute stop thereabouts, those numbers start to dwindle even further. So about 450 of those are very fast chargers that would let you achieve a charge of about 40 minutes or less, depending on the vehicle that you drive. Next slide, please. Now, here's the kicker. When we take out Tesla superchargers, if you're one of the drivers who drives any make or model besides Tesla, you're left with 38 non-Tesla fast chargers across New York. So this infrastructure in no way supports our decarbonization goals or our vehicle electrification goals. And if you take into account reliability and how many of those stations are actually active and available at any given time, then that number goes down even more and the anxiety level goes up. Next slide, please. So that's where Evolve New York comes into play. We're installing at 50 locations. Sorry, I've got a little visitor for anyone who's on video. Buddy, I'm on a call. You gotta give me a minute. So for any of the, let's see, so going ahead over the next year through 2021, we're going to install direct current fast charging at roughly 50 locations and up to 200 locations by 2025. The sites all along the New York State Thruway, I should caveat, are being developed actually by a private developer who is part of the redevelopment of the Thruway rest area, so that won't be Evolve New York chargers, but we are advising on that and making sure that certain thresholds are met around charging speed, payment options, reliability, and things like that. And you'll see that our chargers are in a location, location ranges from urban to rural, typically following travel corridors, and typically aiming to have locations about every 50 miles or so across New York State. Next slide, please. And if you think that these numbers are absolutely insane, just take a look at some of the technology adoption just since the turn of the century. So we can look at those adoption curves and perhaps imagine as Americans and as global citizens get more comfortable with technology adoption, that we can see these rates of adoption, where there's a consumer need and a desire. We can see that those levels of change are certainly possible based on historic precedent. Without my glasses on, I thought that final bullet was toilet and not tablet, so I was really impressed by that particular one, but it's a tablet. Next slide, please. And this is my contact information. If you have questions, I'm happy to field them, and if you want to contact me outside of today's meeting, you're welcome to email me anytime.
Thank you, Rebecca. Does anybody have any questions for Rebecca on the Evolve program? So I do have one question, I guess, and I had mentioned it to you in our email. So right now, these locations are already confirmed that DC Fast Charge will be going in. Is that?
So actually, you can look at our website. We've been engaging a lot with the advocate community, so I don't know if anyone on this call also participates in those quarterly calls, but we had a lot of public outcry just wanting to know exactly where we're siting stations. So I recently uploaded a Google map to Evolve New York's website, which is NYPA.gov/Evolve New York, NY for New York. And you can look at the real-time status. So there's one that's in construction at the Tops supermarket in LaGrangeville. It should have gone live before COVID. We're a bit delayed, obviously, like everyone else because of that. And we just restarted construction. So we're going gangbusters. We're going to be opening in LaGrangeville very soon in the next few weeks. We're also doing a 10 charger install at JFK in the cell phone waiting lot, which will be huge for rideshare and TLC. And then we also have sites coming online in Syracuse, Watertown, Scroon Lake, Malone, all over New York State, including this kind of charging desert from the central New York region through the southern tier. So we're really trying to hit those charging deserts as quickly as we can. And then you'll also see dots on the map where we're in negotiation with a site host. So we work with private site hosts to, host our charging locations or stations. So we also indicate roughly where those sites are in negotiation without necessarily every specific about the site host.
And are those the small black dots on this map, or?
Those are the existing direct current fast charging sites in New York on the black dot. So you can see that we're not trying to crowd out the private sector developers. We just want to fill the gaps in order to achieve that adoption curve that we believe is kind of contingent on fast charging availability.
Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. And
Thank you.
if no one else has any questions, we will move on to the next piece of our agenda, which will be Jen with a presentation on some smart community updates from the Capital District Transportation Committee's Smart Communities Task Force. I think you're on mute, Jen.
Can you make it so that I can share slides?
I
I think if you stop sharing your screen, I can.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay. Can you still see it?
I can.
Okay. So I'm just going to briefly talk about a project that CDCC just wrapped up. As part of our Smart Communities program, we helped the city of Saratoga Springs develop the Municipal Smart City Streetlight Conversion and Evolving Technology Guidebook. And as some of you are familiar with, the CDCC Smart Communities program kind of evolved out of Clean Communities. Originally, we were part of a regional effort to apply for funds for the U.S. Department of Transportation in the Smart City Challenge. And then we kind of pursued smart cities ideas and projects through the Clean Communities Coalition, and then launched its own task force in 2018. We were able to allocate some funds, federal planning funds, for some technical assistance in 2018, and we kicked off the guidebook last year. And continuing to support smart cities and leverage technology and integrate it into the regional transportation system remains a very high priority in our long-range transportation plan, like New Visions, and it's explained and kind of reviewed extensively in the Environment and Technology White Paper. So Saratoga Springs is one of the cities that we worked with through Clean Communities when we were exploring smart cities, and they developed a smart cities roadmap a few years back. And one of their goals in their roadmap was converting their traffic and street lights from incandescents to LEDs. And this is something that a lot of communities are doing right now. So we were happy to work with them And we saw this as something that could benefit other communities in the region. So if you're familiar with Saratoga Springs, you know, there's a lot of different like typologies of street types and development types around the city. They have a bunch of different kinds of lighting right now. They also have a pretty strict historic spec on streetlights depending upon which area they're in. And as they were looking at streetlight conversion, a lot of questions came up. There are a lot of different programs right now through National Grid, through NYPA, through even NYSERDA, and then through all the different private companies to support LED conversion, but you know, evaluating them all, wading through all of the details and seeing what is the most beneficial was somewhat difficult. Also, the city and CDCC had other goals that we wanted to achieve by supporting the LED conversion. So improving the nighttime environment. Downtown Saratoga Springs has a very active nightlife, and there are some safety issues, particularly during the summer. So, you know, how can lighting help make improve safety, both public and traffic safety? There's a lot of workers that are working at restaurants. If you worked in a restaurant, you know you're usually required to wear dark clothing, and then they need to get on the bus, or they're bicycling or crossing Broadway, and it is a traffic safety issue. So improving lighting to make sure that people are more visible and feel safer as they're moving throughout the city. Of course, reducing energy use, saving money, but then also looking at like the applications that can be added onto these new LED streetlights. You know, there's some debate on whether they can be considered smart applications or what exactly they are, but everything from Wi-Fi sensors, speakers, EV charging, pedestrian safety features, wayfinding, real-time information, these can all be added onto these new streetlight poles. So for the city, we just kind of split it into 3 different types to look at different kinds of lighting, residential, downtown, and the institutional areas. And what, you know, the guidebook doesn't tell Saratoga Springs or anyone exactly what kind of lighting and technologies to use. However, it lays out, you know, and weighs all of the benefits of the different options, and tells communities that when they are making these decisions, they need to establish ownership. So you may know streetlights are sometimes they're owned by the municipality, sometimes a utility or someone else basically owns them and pays taxes on that land. So for a city to buy the poles, you know, eliminates that tax revenue they're receiving from the utility owning the poles, but it also then precludes them from really having a lot of freedom or flexibility in what they want to do with the poles or what they want to use on the poles. So they need to figure that out. There's a lot of different incentives and funding available. We did, you know, believe that NYPA's program, particularly for cities, is the most beneficial. And then if these smart technologies and applications, even like EV charging, are going to be added, the city needs to have a bigger management strategy in how they're going to manage this. And there is a lot of operational benefits, but again, you know, knowing how the technology is going to be used and having a plan for that is important. We are encouraging Saratoga Springs and other communities to do pilots to test different technologies and different LED lighting options, and then, you know, decide what is the best option for implementation. So this is just a photo of an example of EV street side, EV charging using an LED streetlight. And there are other options where it's just a plug and the driver has to, you know, use their own cord to plug in. But there, cities like New York City and LA are exploring this more. We don't have good examples of successful LED EV charging, curbside EV charging examples in our region, or really, you know, or in similar regions across the country yet. But this is a developing area, and we hope to see more. Oh, also, you know, as communities are replacing their streetlight poles, it's an opportunity to see, to also update the underlying infrastructure to make sure that, you know, EV charging can be supported, because there needs to be, the infrastructure needs to be there to support it. You can't just assume that you could do this. So going forward, we're going to continue to work with Saratoga Springs and other communities on LED conversion and promote and encourage integrating the EV charging at the street. We have continued funding for Smart Communities initiatives in the new Unified Planning Work Program. And we'll be doing another solicitation for projects, making up to $75,000 available. So we are looking for communities to provide some input on like the kind of assistance they need to move technology integration forward and implement these smart community or smart cities types of projects. If you have any questions, the guidebook is on the CDTC website, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the Smart Communities program going forward. If you're interested in applying or anything else, just let me know.
Thank you, Jen. So with that, that's about the end of our agenda for today, but we did want to finish it up with typically any news from around the table. If any of you on the call have anything in particular that you'd want to share with us, with the others on the call, on kind of maybe what's been going on in your organizations. I'm sure that everything's been you know, less than normal the past few months for all of you. So anybody can chime in if they'd like, or we could wrap it up if nobody's got anything else to add.
I'm increasing my fleet of 100% solar powered electric boats by moving to fiberglass boats. So that's in the process.
Very good, David. So you are you're currently in the process of building the fiberglass. Is that?
Yes.
Transitioning to the fiberglass. Very good. Does anyone else have anything to add?
This is Tara from CDRPC.
Hi, Tara.
Hi. I just wanted to mention something that's interesting that's kind of come up recently. A lot of our communities that Jill and I work with through Clean Energy Communities, we supported them with the New York State DEC ZEP rebates, which are kind of, many of them are coming to a 2-year cycle where their grant reporting is ending, but also their kind of requirement, I guess, to not be charging for these stations is ending as well. So many of the communities are trying to find ways, they're trying to figure out, I guess, what the cost that they should put on their charging for charging stations is. So that's just kind of an interesting question that I've had recently, and that you know, many of these communities are using charge point stations, so they actually make it pretty easy when you go in there owner app to kind of figure out based on the cost of gas what you should charge per kilowatt hour for charging. Some communities are deciding to kind of work together and kind of figure out, you know, you're charging this, so we should also charge this, so we're not kind of competing against each other. So that's just been an interesting thing. I think that's been popping up, and I don't know if more people are experiencing that, but something that's kind of changing is that some of the stations are not going to be free anymore. So,
Tara, do you think that's something that I mean, they're kind of figuring out on their own and making do with it, or do you think that's something that would be helpful to have kind of a you know, kind of collaborative discussion on with, you know, potentially this group? I actually was just talking with someone yesterday, a presenter that I'm anticipating to have in that electric vehicle readiness workshop, excuse me, where we kind of had that discussion on the pricing, excuse me. And he almost thought that that was potentially, you know, kind of a second iteration of that type of workshop. But if many of the communities in the region are kind of experiencing that issue now with what to do with pricing, there was something that was on my mind to incorporate into that later this year.
Yeah, no, I definitely say it would be worth it to have some kind of discussion or collaboration, or some guidance for communities. You know, they're, like I said, they're kind of talking to others that they know that are neighboring communities, but if there was some regional guidance, I think that could be helpful to make sure that, you know, it is very foreign to many of these towns who, you know, even the people running the stations don't have EV cars, so they're not clear what the going rate is, and you know, they don't want to make too much profit on, or they don't really want to make a profit. They just want to be able to pay for their subscription fees and things like that. So, and obviously the cost of the energy. So it's you know, definitely something I think that could be discussed further.
Very good. Yeah, the idea that we were thinking is maybe having someone like from ChargePoint or maybe another manufacturer to come in to say, you know, here are the different options that you have to kind of manipulate that pricing scheme. You know, it may not just be a straight per kilowatt hour, right? It can be varied by how long you're on, and you know, each station across your municipality could be different. So we're kind of thinking, right, something along those lines on what are all the options that you have for charging for electricity. So very good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Jacob, I guess at U Albany.
Hey,
Just
Jason.
a brief update. I mean, obviously, a lot is to be determined within academia. You know, right now we're really expecting decreased enrollment, retention rates, that type of thing. So it's a very tough time in the university sector, you know, as part of that. And there's a few alums on here as well that, you know, 50% of our students come from the downstate area, right? Westchester, Long Island, New York City. So it's going to be interesting to see what occurs in the fall semester. And, you know, as this relates to parking and mass transit services here, we very much anticipate more single occupancy use, you know, the reluctance to potentially use mass transit services, you know, car sharing, ride sharing, that type of thing. So where traditionally our parking capacities are pretty tight, we anticipate, even though there will be more vehicles on campus this semester per student, let's say, there'll be less students on campus. So that'll kind of make up the difference a little bit, you know. And we also are implementing models as it relates to social distancing on the buses. Really, a lot of our models indicate for a 40 passenger bus, the max capacity could probably be about 12 or 13 passengers, which is really going to impact our operations, which, again, going back to another mass transit challenges is that, you know, if you can only have 13 people on a 40 passenger bus, we're looking at scenarios where we'll actually run back-to-back buses. So 2 buses follow in the same time frame. So if there's, let's say, 26 people waiting at a stop, we would do 13 and 13. So with 2 buses. So it's really, when it comes down to transit, very impactful, because it's going to increase our carbon footprint, both in terms of buses and single occupancy vehicles. And just all these gains that we have made over the last several years, many of us here on this call, as it relates to, you know, transportation demand management, I believe we're seeing a lot of those impacts, and just the early reluctance to use some of these services, you know, even talking about, again, bike share as part of that as well. So it's going to be a very interesting semester. We do anticipate having about a 70% reduction in in-person classes. So if we traditionally have about 3,000 in-person classes, we're going to be down to about 500 or 600. So with the rest of them being virtual and or remote, whatever term you might want to use. So very much going to be a challenging semester here at the university. In the fall, you know, right now we just continue to kind of work remotely, some days in the office, some days out, but you know, that'll soon change. So just to give you a brief update from the University of Albany, not as positive updates that I traditionally give, but it is the reality of the situation. So I just wanted everybody to know.
For sure. Yeah, definitely good to hear from you, Jason, on that. It's, yeah, certainly interesting to see what's going to be happening with you know, high schools as well, but certainly universities. Any other comments? I am hearing no one else chime in, so we're right about at our hour and a half anyway, so that timing works out. I want to thank everyone for joining us here on this first virtual Clean Cities meeting for the Capital District Clean Communities. Next meeting date anticipated for September 17th, 2020. I'm putting location to be determined. It's probably very likely that we will have another virtual meeting, but I guess we don't know for sure. So if anybody else has any questions, feel free to contact me, reach out, you know, let me know if you've got anything to add. I also added that registration to this afternoon's electric school bus funding webinar if anyone would like to register last minute. But other than that, I think that's all I have for today. So want to thank you all for attending again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you. Everyone have a good weekend.
You too.